Wi-Fi at conference. I move.
Thank you, Jack. I'm now going to put standing audit reports number 1 and number 2 to the floor. All agreed? Agreed. Okay. Thanks, Jack. I'm now calling the Vice President, Brian Camfield.
Yeah, well, he's calling on me to invite himself as President to address conference. So I'm asking John Douglas, President, to address conference.
Thanks. You're very welcome to Clare, delegates. Beautiful parts of the country. I hope you get some time to visit some of the surrounding areas around Clare. It's one of my favourite counties. Holiday down here quite a lot. As we gather here today in Ennis, County Clare, as the largest civil society organisation on the island of Ireland, we do so at a time of great uncertainty. Uncertainty about the economic and social recovery, not only in Ireland, but also across Europe. And in particularly, our thoughts and solidarity are with the people of Greece, who have been put through the financial ringer by their creditors. The potential long-term damage to the social fabric of Greece is immense, and as it was the case in Ireland, will penalise the most vulnerable, while the elite are allowed to continue their lifestyles unhindered. The governments of Europe, including the Irish, sit idly by, with a smugness which, to say the least, is inappropriate, if not downright offensive. The people of Greece have spoken. Listen to them, lift the burden of this unsustainable debt. There needs to be a European debt conference at which the issue of debt and debt restructuring is considered from the social perspective of the European Union and the peoples of Europe, rather than solely looking at it from the financial institutions of Europe and the ideologues of austerity. As trade unionists and internationalists, we take no satisfaction from the distress of others, either at home or abroad. Our watchword is solidarity with workers and the families of Greece, Spain and Portugal. Let us, as international trade union movement, stand together for justice. And I'd like to ask delegates if you wouldn't mind standing and giving a round of applause in a show of solidarity for the Greek people. Justice for Greece. In the very near future, our solidarity as an international trade union movement and an effective campaigning movement will once again be called into action. The so-called BritEx referendum in the UK must not be allowed to give the Tory government an opportunity to attack social Europe, to attack human rights, to attack workers' rights. The rest of Europe must stand firm in defending decency in the UK. Failure to do so calls into question the very rationale for the existence of a European Union. If the Tory government succeeds, the European Union will become no more than a patchwork of opt-outs in which countries try and gain advantage over their neighbours. We must also continue to vigorously campaign against the one-sided international free trade agreements, such as TTIP, which are in fact a charter for a race to the lowest common denominator, in which labour standards and trade union rights are seen as blockages to free trade, and where international financiers and global corporations can sue sovereign states in secret corporate courts as part of the ISDS process. These secret courts and free trade agreements have little or nothing to do with free trade, but all to do with protecting international capital and weakening labour. Turning back to Ireland, there appears to be some tenuous signs of recovery in the Irish economy, at least in the Republic. I will turn to Northern Ireland later. The trade union movement must be vigilant that those forces that wreaked havoc on our economy and our society are not allowed to rebuild our same failed economic model again. We must ensure that the most vulnerable are prioritised in any recovery, and that the unfair damage inflicted on the social wage is repaired, and that resources are prioritised to lift families out of poverty and homelessness, and that decent living wage jobs are created, and that all sectors of our economy make a fair and equitable contribution towards resourcing the recovery of our society. We cannot allow political parties to play loose and easy with our vision of a real and fair, sustainable social recovery by auction politics to secure votes. We must expose these politicians and self-interest groups that would trade decency and a social wage for power and for gain. A mature conversation needs to take place among all citizens of Ireland as we approach the centenary of 1916 as to what sort of economy and what sort of society we want and what are we prepared to pay for it. Self-interest must be set aside, and the I'm all right, Jack attitude of appeasing sections of voters or union members must be set aside also. We must join the dots between decent public services in health, education and housing and our social contribution as citizens of this island. Our public service and receiving these resources must continue to deliver a world-class service to those who resource the social wage and must be willing also and able to adapt to the changing need of citizens and society. The broken social wage system we have at the moment forces tens of thousands of our citizens to take out private provision in a market driven solely by the profit motive. And this market only exists because of the inadequate manner in which we fund and deliver our public services. This suits the ideology of many political parties, and hence they have a vested interest in starving our public services of resources. The trade union movement is a resilient movement. We have withstood, as did our comrades across Europe, an orchestrated campaign to destroy and marginalise us. On this island of Ireland, the trade union movement is stronger than ever, I believe. We have rediscovered our activism, our campaigning spirit. We have shaken off the shackles of top-down centralised bargaining. Our members are mobilising and winning. They have rediscovered collectivism and collective action where necessary. Our unions have retrained, refocused and redeployed tens of thousands of new union activists. We are now stronger and more capable of defending and winning for our members. We are cutting the teeth of a whole new generation of trade union leaders and community activists in struggles such as Greyhound, the Paris Bakery, the Radican Dispute, Dublin Bus, Connolly Shoes, Cleary's, Vita Cortex and Dunn Stores. We're again working with and working in local communities, forming alliances, and as a result, we have won the public narrative. In fact, I believe we have changed the public narrative. Nothing proves this more than the Decency for Dunn's Workers campaign. The public actually get it. A decent job and a decent living wage are basic human rights. The Irish public are now more disposed to trade unions now than in the recent past, because we are fighting for and standing up for real everyday issues which impact on them and their families and their communities and their workplaces. The public's experience of previous corrupt regimes has been exposed. The public has outed the cheerleaders of big capital. They understand that a strong social movement, such as the trade union movement, is essential for a fairer society. For without one, the financial wolves will have another field day. The demonisation of the trade unions and workers has failed. Collectively, our members and their communities have a central role in rebuilding our country from the ground up. We're not interested in social dialogue which confines or constrains the legitimate role of our members. In what I believe was the biggest mass social mobilisation since the foundation of the state, the Right to Water, anti-water charges movement can give us an indication of just what can be achieved by people power, by communities, by union members, by trade unions working together towards a single objective. While the water charges movement did and does not have universal support within the trade union movement, it is true to say that the extensive concessions won by the campaign will be enjoyed by all trade unionists. And while it is understood and understandable that some unions, because of their particular membership base, or indeed constitutions, cannot openly support the campaign, it is clear that union members across all unions are a central part of the anti-water charges movement. I believe, and I strongly believe, that if the trade union movement was totally absent from the anti-water charges movement, that it would have had a severe damaging impact on the credibility of this movement. There are 2 motions on water charges on the agenda for decision this week, and I'm confident that as trade unionists we can have a respectful and reasoned debate in the knowledge that there are no enemies in this hall today, just comrades with different views and tactics, all striving for the same goal. In the 2 years since Belfast Conference, at which we set ourselves some very important objectives, Some of these objectives we have achieved, others we continue to struggle for, work in progress, if you will. For example, we managed to win legislation on collective bargaining. Although far from perfect, it can form a foundation on which we can win and build further. But delegates, legislation on collective bargaining alone will not do the heavy lifting for the trade union movement. We must recruit and organise. We must educate and agitate. Every union must work part of this movement. We owe our very existence to the unselfish sacrifices of previous generations of trade unionists, dockers, builders, retail workers, public servants, all of whom put their own self-interest of their own grade aside for the greater ideal of the trade union movement. No legislation will ever do this for us. So whether it's a fair hotel, a fair shop, we must stand together in supporting each other and supporting the goods and services that are delivered and manufactured in employments which respect our workers and our workers' rights. The others, frankly, do not deserve our support. We also won the re-establishment of joint labour committees and the registered employment agreements after they were struck down in the High Court on application by various employer groups. The joint labour committees and the registered employment agreements have the potential to set basic decency thresholds and standards in sectors of the economy where abuse and exploitation are rife. Sectors such as hospitality, retail, cleaning, security and construction. But we are concerned to learn with the attitude of employers in these sectors. Already we have seen employers in the retail sectors refuse to engage in the newly established JLC system, thereby vetoing the express wishes of government. I am calling on the Irish government to introduce immediate legislation to either compel employers in these sectors to engage or legislation which makes it possible to proceed without them. I'm also disappointed as President that during my term we have yet not succeeded in removing the FEMPI legislation. This legislation is an affront to good industrial relations and has no place in free collective bargaining. I also acknowledge the first step at pay restoration in the public service under the Lansdowne Road Agreement. But I will refrain from further comment as I'm aware that a number of unions are still consulting with their members on same. Suffice to say that the objective of this trade union movement is for full restoration of all pay and conditions and the removal of FEMPI. The other objective remaining as work in progress is the work of the Trade Union Commission. And to be honest, progress has been painfully slow. But there are still a considerable number of unions working behind the scenes, cooperating and sharing resources and sharing projects. The work of the Commission, I believe, is as much a state of mind as it is a bricks and mortar project. The Commission has allowed the conversation to happen, with unions opening up to each other, to supporting our shared objectives. None so much, again, as the Decency for Duns campaign. The level of support, the shared resources, be they financial or staff, was overwhelming to my own union mandate. There was no divide between public or private, higher paid or lower paid, or north or south. On behalf of my members in Dunstores, I'd like to thank the trade union movement on this island for all your support. It did make a big, big difference. So the Commission's work, by its very nature, is ongoing, and I believe it will bear fruit, and it will bear fruit that we are changing to win. Turning now to Northern Ireland, and I know Brother Bunting will be covering Northern Ireland more extensively during the week, so I will confine my remarks to a couple of remarks. I would like to commend, first of all, the Northern Ireland Committee of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions for its ongoing campaign against the Tory government austerity agenda and attack on welfare. This campaign brought thousands of trade unionists and their families onto the streets of Northern Ireland on the 13th of March 2015. Northern Ireland is already the most deprived region of the UK, and the welfare cuts being proposed and the 20,000 public sector job losses being enforced by the Tory government will, if unchallenged, plunge Northern Ireland into the dark ages. And to add insult to injury, this Wednesday, the Tory government, in its budget, proposes another 12 billion in cuts, mostly from welfare. The present budgetary impasse in Northern Ireland is a reflection of the seriousness of the situation. The trade union movement in Northern Ireland has led the way in opposition to the cuts and arguably has forced some political parties to shift and support our stance. While the Good Friday Agreement was essentially a political settlement between parties which delivered the peace, it must also deliver on its commitments to the citizens of Northern Ireland for decent jobs, for social services and for a Bill of Rights. Not to do so will jeopardise the peace that we all hold so dearly. The British and Irish governments need to recognise Northern Ireland as a region emerging from conflict, a region with special and unique requirements. Austerity policies are damaging to all communities in Ireland and in the UK, but they are doubly damaging in an already fragile and poverty-stricken region, which is Northern Ireland. This is the reality the Irish and British government need to grasp, and the reality that all parties in Northern Ireland who have the best interests of their communities at heart must accept. A united cross-community opposition platform to Tory austerity cuts is the best and only way of protecting all communities against poverty and discrimination in Northern Ireland. As we head into the centenary of 1916 and the first reading on the streets of Dublin of the Proclamation of the Republic, which has as its very core the socialist principles of equality, liberty, fraternity, we must critically examine the Ireland of today in terms of these founding ideals. We must ask ourselves, as one of the wealthiest nations in Europe, why are we also one of the most unequal? Do we still, as a nation, aspire to these core ideals and principles of the Republic? And if the answer is yes, then we need to know how false the statistics on child poverty, on homelessness, on social housing, on income inequality, the attacks on single parents, on the under-26s, on welfare payments, on the way we treat migrant workers and asylum seekers in direct provision. All of these devalue our status as a republic and are an indictment on this and previous governments. 2016 also leads us into a possible election year, both in the Republic and in Northern Ireland in the Assembly elections, during which we as trade unionists must grasp the nettle of political power with our membership basis. We must campaign for a government which advocates and implements the true principles and ideals of a republic. We must campaign for a mass mobilisation akin to what we witnessed during the marriage equality referendum in order to secure the political ground which allows us to deliver the social agenda along with the industrial agenda. We must challenge our members. We must question party loyalties. We must set aside our own self-interest or the self-interest of our own members. Our vision can never be achieved by industrial agitation alone. No union can profess to be non-political. Each morning your members wait for a bus or wait in an A&E is the result of a political decision. In fact, some unions who claim to be generally non-political are often the most political when it comes to protecting and advancing their own members' interests. So therefore, we must engage with our 750,000 members and their families so that they appreciate the great potential for change as yet unharnessed within the trade union movement. We must not abandon the future well-being of our members and our families and future generations. We must show real leadership, real vision. Most of all, our members must believe that they and they alone, acting together, can achieve this vision. In the words of James Connolly, for our demands most moderate are, we only want the earth. Thank you.
Could I call on Stevie Fitzpatrick to move a vote of thanks to the President?
Thanks, President, and congratulations, Brian. Good morning, delegates. I've been given the honour and pleasure of proposing a vote of thanks to the President for his speech here this morning. And I'd like to thank the Executive Council and the General Secretary for giving me that honour. Myself and John have become great friends over the years, and his speech reflects his actions. John has been a president for the members, and a president for communities. When he talks about solidarity, he lived the solidarity. He famously climbed over the back wall in the Paris Bakery to go and see a match. I don't know whether that's called abandonment of duty or not. He's been at every demo, whether it's been Greyhound, and of course with his great union mandate has led to Dunn's situation, which I believe will result in a change of legislation that will benefit workers both in and out of unions. John is a very honest broker. He's passionate, and he wears his heart on his sleeve, as you'll have heard here today. But I think, in real terms, his gift to us will be that he's made trade unions accessible to ordinary people and communities. He's broken the barrier of us being up there and them being down there, and I think we should all be grateful for that. He's also quite innovative. At our own conference there recently, I asked him to do a vote of thanks to our union, and he hadn't got any paper with him, but he managed to find 2 pages in the back of Gideon's Bible. I'm not so sure that's what the original intention was. So anyway, look, I know people will have an opportunity to thank him at the end of the conference. Chairing the conference is the hardest job you'll ever have. You can do everything right, Stan Norris can do everything right. It only takes one delegate to mess it up. I'm not inviting anybody to do that. And John has chaired the Executive Council in a very inclusive way. Everybody felt happy, everybody felt they had to say, and I'm sure he'll do that this week, but he'll need our assistance. So could I just ask you to join with me in a vote of thanks for the President's speech and to wish him well for the rest of the conference. Thank you very much, conference.
Okay, thanks, Davy. Can I call on Patricia McKeown to second that?
Thank you, delegates. Patricia McKeown, Unison and Executive Council. There is a reason why this movement in such great measure responded to the call in June to support the Dunnes Stores workers, and responded from all parts of this island. And John has mentioned that in the call in his presidential address: real leadership and real vision. And we responded because that's what we've had from John over the past 2 years. And in fact, even before then, as Vice President in 2013, John was with us all the way when we were opposing the G8 meeting in the north. He was with us on all of the major strikes and campaigns we've had, both before and during his presidency, and it was but proper that in response we would come and support John, who during what has been a very difficult 2 years of that presidency, also as a champion of the low paid, managed to secure €20 million for his members in his industry. In his presidential address today, he has talked to us about the state of the island, the state of more than one nation internationally. He's talked to us about the challenges facing us for the future. And I think in his address, he has set down a very clear set of challenges for this movement in the future. But he also has done something very important, and Stevie's already referred to that. He has recaptured activism. He has caught the imagination of workers and their communities across the island, and in particular, he has put the most disadvantaged right at the top of the agenda. So I think as a movement, we have to be very proud of what our President has done on our behalf over the last 2 years. It's going to be a hard act to follow, Brian, but I know you can rise to it. But for all of us, what we have to do is respond to the real challenge that John has presented to us. It is a time for real leadership and real vision right across this island. This is a president who has embraced both jurisdictions and understood that the Irish Congress of Trade Unions is at its strongest when it recognises that it is an all-island movement. So on behalf of all of us, John, and for your presidential address today, I say thank you.
Thank you very much.